At 10:47 a.m. on February 3, 1945, Captain Robert Bob Millikan's oxygen mask stopped delivering air. He's at 42,000 feet above the Bavarian Alps in his P-47 Thunderbolt. The temperature outside hovers at minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit. His mission is simple: escort 72 B-17 Flying Fortresses on their bombing run to the Messerschmitt production facility at Regensburg. Down below, 970 American bomber crewmen depend on him and 15 other P-47 pilots to keep them alive. Milikin takes a breath. Nothing comes. He tries again. His oxygen regulator hisses uselessly. The rubber mask smells like ice and fear. He's got maybe 90 seconds before hypoxia shuts down his brain. At this altitude, consciousness disappears faster than most pilots can recognize the symptoms. Vision narrows to a tunnel. Fingers go numb. Rational thought evaporates. Then you're just another aircraft in an uncontrolled dive toward German countryside. Another statistic in the casualty reports that pour out of IT Fighter Command headquarters every night. But Milikin can't descend. Not yet. 3,000 feet below him, a formation of German Focke-Wulf Ta-152H interceptors climbs toward the bomber stream. These aren't ordinary German fighters. The Ta-152H represents the Luftwaffe's answer to American high-altitude superiority. With pressurized cockpits and supercharged junkers, Jumo 213 engines producing 2,050 horsepower, these aircraft can fight effectively at altitudes where American pilots struggle to breathe. Milikin watches the Ta-152s through increasingly blurred vision. They're 4 minutes from intercept position, 4 minutes from ripping into the bomber formation with 20mm cannons and 30mm Mk-108 guns, 4 minutes from killing dozens of men who can't defend themselves against high-altitude interceptors. The mathematics are brutal. If Milikin descends to breathable altitude, the German fighters reach the bombers unopposed. If he stays at 42,000 feet without oxygen, he passes out, crashes, and the Germans still reach the bombers. What Captain Milikin doesn't know, what no American pilot has yet discovered, is that fighter aircraft can become weapons even when their pilots can't breathe. That gravity and aerodynamics don't care about oxygen deprivation, that a carefully planned glide path can position an unconscious pilot directly into an enemy formation, and that sometimes the most effective attack comes from the last place your enemy expects. A silent, powerless aircraft falling from the sky with its pilot already halfway to death. By February 1945, the 8th Air Force faces a crisis that official doctrine refuses to acknowledge. German high-altitude interceptors are systematically destroying American bomber formations above 38,000 feet. The Focke-Wulf Ta-152H, introduced in combat just 6 weeks earlier, operates in an altitude band where American fighter escorts struggle to survive. These statistics tell the story. Between December 15, 1944 and February 2, 1945, Ta-152 interceptors shoot down 47 B-17 Flying Fortresses at altitudes above 37,000 feet. That's 470 American airmen killed or captured. Loss rate increases by 12% whenever German high-altitude fighters engage above 38,000 feet. American escort fighters, primarily P-51D Mustangs and P-47D Thunderbolts, carry theoretical service ceilings of 41,900 feet and 43,000 feet, respectively. But theory means nothing when human physiology becomes the limiting factor. Fighter pilots at extreme altitude face cascading failures. Oxygen systems designed for 35,000-foot operations strain at 40,000 feet. Regulators freeze, seals crack, delivery pressure drops, and even when oxygen systems work perfectly, they're fighting against physics. At 42,000 feet, atmospheric pressure measures just 2.1 pounds per square inch, 1/7 of sea level pressure. The result is time of useful consciousness. The medical term describes how long a pilot remains functional after oxygen supply fails. At 25,000 feet, useful consciousness lasts 3 to 5 minutes. At 35,000 feet, 30 to 60 seconds. At 42,000 feet, 9 to 15 seconds. That's how long Captain Milikin has to make decisions before his brain shuts down. The Army Air Forces tried standard solutions. They modified oxygen regulators, improved delivery systems, added backup bottles. Results were marginal at best. The fundamental problem remained. Human bodies weren't designed to fight wars in near-vacuum conditions. VAIT Fighter Command issued clear directives. If oxygen systems fail above 35,000 feet, pilots must descend immediately to 25,000 feet. No exceptions. The regulation appears in every pilot's briefing book, underlined in red. Continuation of combat operations without oxygen at high altitude is prohibited and will result in court-martial. The regulation makes perfect sense. Unconscious pilots can't fight. They can't protect bombers. They become liabilities rather than assets. Better to have fighters at lower altitude than to have dead pilots and crashed aircraft scattered across Germany. But regulations written in headquarters briefing rooms don't account for the specific geometry of combat. On February 3, 1945, Major Frank Henderson, Milikin's squadron commander, leads 16 P-47 Thunderbolts from the 56th Fighter Group. Their mission briefing at 0600 hours emphasizes altitude. German interceptors confirmed operating above 38,000 feet. Maintain altitude advantage. Do not let Ta-152s achieve position above bomber stream. Henderson knows what "do not let" means. It means American fighters must fly higher than German interceptors, must maintain position between enemy and bombers, must sacrifice American pilots' oxygen margins to prevent German pilots from achieving firing solutions on B-17s. The briefing mentions oxygen system reliability, 73% at 40,000 feet, dropping to 61% at 42,000 feet. That means 4 out of 16 pilots will likely experience oxygen problems. Henderson doesn't mention this to his pilots. No point worrying them about statistics they can't change. What Henderson does tell his pilots is this: "Gentlemen, we've lost 47 bombers in 6 weeks to high-altitude interceptors. That's 470 of our brothers. Today, we're escorting another 72 bombers with 720 crewmen. Every single one of those men is depending on us to keep Jerry off their backs. I don't care how cold it gets. I don't care how thin the air gets. We stay between the Germans and our bombers. Period." The pilots nod. They understand the unspoken mathematics. Better 16 fighter pilots at risk than 720 bomber crewmen exposed to interceptors. Captain Robert Millikan sits in the third row, taking notes. He's 24 years old, from Boise, Idaho. 53 combat missions logged, 7 confirmed kills. He writes in his notebook, "Stay high, protect bombers, nothing else matters." He has no idea that in 4 hours his oxygen system will fail at the worst possible moment, and he'll be forced to prove whether anything matters when you can't breathe. Robert Millikan wasn't supposed to become a fighter pilot. He grew up on a wheat farm outside Boise, Idaho during the Depression. His family worked 320 acres of land that barely produced enough income to survive. Young Robert learned early that survival meant understanding how things worked. Engines, hydraulics, harvest equipment that broke constantly and couldn't be replaced. His father, Thomas Milikin, taught him a principle that would later save his life. "Bobby, when machinery fails, you don't panic. You understand what's still working and use that." In 1937, when Robert was 16, the family's John Deere Model A tractor lost its engine halfway up a steep slope during harvest. Thomas was driving. Robert rode beside him. The engine seized, the tractor stopped, and gravity began pulling 7,000 pounds of machinery backward down a 30-degree incline toward a ravine. Most drivers would have jumped clear. Thomas stayed in the seat and turned the steering wheel. Dead engine, but the wheels still turned. The steering still worked. He angled the tractor sideways across the slope, increasing surface friction, slowing the slide. The tractor stopped 20 feet from the ravine edge. Robert watched his father use gravity and friction and geometry to control a machine that had lost its power source. The lesson stuck. Milikin joined the Army Air Corps in March 1942, 3 months after Pearl Harbor. He had no college education, no flying experience, no connections. What he had was a mechanical aptitude that impressed his flight instructors. He understood how aircraft systems worked together, how engine, power, airspeed, altitude, and control surfaces created a web of interdependent variables. He graduated flight school in November 1942, trained on P-47 Thunderbolts at Farmingdale, Long Island, and deployed to England in June 1943 with the 56th Fighter Group. By February 1945, Milikin has flown 53 combat missions. His kill record, 7 confirmed, 3 probable, places him in the upper tier of 8 fighter command pilots, but nowhere near ace status. Other pilots have better gunnery, faster reflexes, more aggressive tactics. What makes Milikin exceptional is his understanding of energy management. Fighter combat at high altitude isn't about pulling harder turns or flying faster. It's about managing kinetic and potential energy, converting altitude into speed, converting speed into position, understanding that every maneuver costs energy and that running out of energy means running out of options. Milikin's squadron mates notice his habit. Before every mission, he studies the route, calculates distances, estimates fuel consumption at various altitudes. Other pilots tease him about it. Milikin's doing his homework again. Gonna be a quiz later, Professor. But Milikin's precision brings him home 53 times, brings his wingmen home, brings damaged aircraft back to English bases when other pilots would have bailed out over Germany. His crew chief, Master Sergeant Tony Esposito, summarizes it simply. Captain Milikin treats his aircraft like farm equipment, understands what breaks, what doesn't, what keeps working even when systems fail. Best pilot I've ever maintained for. On February 3, 1945, that farm boy understanding of how to control failing machinery will be tested in conditions no one has ever survived. At 42,000 feet without oxygen, falling toward 3 German interceptors, climbing at 400 miles per hour. 4 days before the February 3rd mission, something happened that Milikin doesn't report. On January 30th, during a training flight over the North Sea, his oxygen regulator malfunctions at 38,000 feet. Not completely failed, just intermittent, delivering air for 10 seconds, then cutting out for 5 seconds, then resuming. Milikin should have descended immediately, should have aborted the training sortie. Standard procedure, written regulations, common sense. Instead, he experiments. He times the oxygen cycles, discovers they're predictable. 10 seconds on, 5 seconds off. He practices breathing discipline, slow, measured breaths during delivery periods, holding breath during cutout periods. And he notices something unexpected. Holding his breath at altitude doesn't cause immediate panic. His body compensates. Vision dims slightly, heart rate increases. But for 15 to 20 seconds, he remains functional. More importantly, he remains conscious. Milikin starts calculating. If oxygen fails completely at 40,000 feet, time of useful consciousness is 12 to 15 seconds. But if he prepares mentally, controls his breathing, maybe he can extend that to 25 seconds. What can a fighter pilot do with 25 seconds? Back at RAF Boxted, Milikin doesn't mention the oxygen malfunction to his crew chief. doesn't file a maintenance report, doesn't tell anyone what he's discovered, because what he's discovered violates every regulation in the 8 Fighter Command playbook. But he does something else, something nobody notices. He starts carrying an extra bailout oxygen bottle in his cockpit, the small emergency cylinder typically stored in the survival pack. He repositions it where he can reach it with his left hand without looking down. And he practices the motion. Right hand flies the aircraft. Left hand finds the emergency bottle valve. Flip and turn. 2 seconds. Sergeant Esposito notices the repositioned bottle during pre-flight inspection. "Sir, your emergency O2 is out of position." "I moved it. Personal preference." Regulations specify storage in the survival pack. Regulations also say don't fly with faulty oxygen systems. Milikin looks directly at Esposito. "Sometimes you need equipment accessible when systems fail." Esposito stares at Milikin for 3 seconds, then nods slowly. 26 years maintaining aircraft teaches you when not to ask questions. The other thing Milikin does, he studies high-altitude glide performance, not from manuals or training documents, from direct experimentation. On February 1st, during another solo training flight, Milikin climbs to 41,000 feet, throttles back to idle, and glides. He times the descent rate, 850 feet per minute at 220 miles per hour, indicated airspeed. Glide ratio approximately 12:1. Every 1,000 feet of altitude equals 12,000 feet, roughly 2 miles of horizontal travel. More importantly, he discovers that a gliding P-47 Thunderbolt remains fully controllable. The control surfaces still work. The aircraft still responds to inputs. You can maneuver, you can aim, you just can't climb and you can't sustain altitude. But if your target is below you, if you're diving toward enemy aircraft instead of chasing them, then lack of engine power doesn't matter. Gravity does all the work. Milikin doesn't tell anyone about these experiments, doesn't file reports, doesn't discuss the possibility that a fighter aircraft might remain combat effective even when its pilot can't breathe. He just makes sure his emergency oxygen bottle is positioned correctly, and hopes he never needs to test his theory with 3 German interceptors climbing toward him at 400 miles per hour. The confrontation happens on February 2nd, 1 day before the mission. Major Frank Henderson calls a special briefing for the 56th Fighter Group's senior pilots. Intelligence has confirmed Ta-152H interceptors operating above 38,000 feet along the Regensburg corridor. Tomorrow's mission will penetrate directly through their operational area. Henderson stands at the front of the briefing room. 12 pilots sit in wooden chairs. Cigarette smoke fills the air. Henderson taps a map of southern Germany. "Gentlemen, tomorrow we're facing high-altitude interceptors with every advantage. They've got pressurized cockpits. We don't. They've got reliable oxygen at 40,000 feet. We don't. They're operating in conditions that put us at maximum risk." Captain William Sorensen, Henderson's executive officer, asks the obvious question. "Sir, why are we taking this mission? Why not assign high-altitude escort to P-51 groups?" Henderson's jaw tightens. "Because VWWII Fighter Command ordered it. Because we're the only group available. Because someone has to protect those bombers." The room goes quiet. Every pilot knows the real answer. They're expendable. Fighter pilots are more replaceable than bomber crews. That's when Milikin speaks up. "Major, what if we approach the problem differently?" Henderson turns. "Differently how, Captain?" "German interceptors climb to altitude, establish position above the bomber's stream, then dive for attack runs. That climb takes time, 6 to 7 minutes from their typical patrol altitude. If we can intercept during their climb, catch them while they're still below 38,000 feet, we eliminate their altitude advantage." Sorensen shakes his head. "They'll see us coming. They'll break off and reset. Not if we're above them, not if we attack from a dive position. Henderson frowns. Captain, you're suggesting we climb above 40,000 feet and wait for German interceptors. That puts us in oxygen failure territory. Yes, sir. That's insane. That's gambling 16 pilots' lives on oxygen systems with 60% reliability at extreme altitude. Sir, we're gambling 720 bomber crewmen's lives if we don't. The room erupts. 3 pilots start talking simultaneously. Sorensen slams his hand on the desk. Milikin, you're proposing deliberate violation of oxygen safety regulations. You're proposing we risk hypoxia, unconsciousness, aircraft loss. I'm proposing we protect the bombers. By getting ourselves killed. Henderson raises his voice. Gentlemen, quiet. The room settles. Henderson looks at Milikin. Captain, explain your tactical reasoning. Milikin stands, walks to the map. Ta-152 interceptors operate between 37,000 and 40,000 feet. They maintain station altitude, wait for bomber formations, then execute diving attacks. Standard Luftwaffe high-altitude doctrine. But they don't patrol above 40,000 feet because their fuel consumption increases dramatically. And if we establish patrol altitude at 42,000 feet, directly along their approach vector, we force them into 2 choices: abort, intercept, or climb through our position. Either way, we disrupt their attack geometry. Sorensen interrupts. And when our oxygen systems fail at 42,000 feet, we become casualties instead of combat assets. Only if we stay there, we use altitude as potential energy. German interceptors appear below us. We convert altitude into dive speed, attack while descending through their formation, then exit to lower altitude where oxygen systems function. Henderson studies the map. You're suggesting hit-and-run tactics from unsustainable altitude. Yes, sir. 5 minutes at 42,000 feet. That's within most pilots' oxygen system reliability window. We use those 5 minutes to establish position. German fighters appear. We attack. We're back at 35,000 feet in 30 seconds. And if oxygen fails before German fighters appear? Milikin hesitates. This is the part he can't explain. The part about gliding. The part about emergency bottles. The part about testing consciousness limits over the North Sea. Sir, if oxygen fails, standard emergency descent procedures apply. Henderson stares at Milikin for 10 seconds. The Major knows Milikin isn't telling him everything, knows there's more to this proposal than tactical positioning. Finally, Henderson nods once. Captain Milikin, you'll lead the high-altitude element, 4 aircraft. You establish position at 42,000 feet along the German approach vector. You have 5-minute window. Oxygen problems, you descend immediately, no exceptions. Clear? Yes, sir. Anyone who violates oxygen emergency procedures will face court-martial. Anyone who passes out and crashes their aircraft will face, well, they'll already be dead, but their families will receive letters explaining their son died from stupidity. Understood? Understood, sir. Before we continue to the combat mission, if you're learning something new about the desperate battles fought at extreme altitude, where American pilots risked everything to protect bomber crews, hit that subscribe button. We release new military history content every week, and your support helps us tell these forgotten stories. Now, back to February 3rd, 1945, where Captain Milikin's oxygen system is about to fail at the worst possible moment. February 3rd, 1945, 10:47 a.m., Captain Robert Milikin leads his 4-ship element at 42,000 feet, 15 miles ahead of the bomber stream. His wingmen fly in loose combat spread. Lieutenant Danny Martinez 500 feet to his right, Lieutenant James Kowalski 1,000 feet left and back, Lieutenant Peter Duchamp covering high position 2,000 feet above. The air at this altitude is so thin that engine power drops 40%. The P-47's normally thunderous Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine sounds muted, struggling. Manifold pressure barely reaches 32 inches despite full throttle. The aircraft feels sluggish, mushy. Turn radius degrades. Acceleration disappears. Milikin checks his instruments. Oxygen flow indicator shows steady delivery. But he knows these indicators lie. They measure regulator pressure, not actual oxygen reaching his mask. And at 42,000 feet, the difference between steady delivery and catastrophic failure can happen in one breath. His left hand rests near the emergency oxygen bottle, just in case. At 10:46 a.m., radar control transmits, Dogwood leader, Snowflake, bandits your 1 o'clock low, 12 miles, climbing through 38,000, estimated 3+ aircraft. Milikin keys his radio. Snowflake, Dogwood lead copies, visual searching. 30 seconds later, Martinez calls contact. Lead, Dogwood 2, tally 3 bandits, 11 o'clock low, 39,000. Milikin spots them, 3 aircraft in Vic formation climbing steadily, the distinctive inline engine silhouettes of Focke-Wulf Ta-152H interceptors, long noses, narrow fuselages, inverted gull wings. These are the enemy. These are the aircraft responsible for 47 bomber kills in 6 weeks. Milikin calculates intercept geometry. Ta-152H's climbing at 400 miles per hour, indicated airspeed, rate of climb approximately 2,100 feet per minute. Current altitude 39,000 feet. Time to Milikin's altitude, 90 seconds. But the German pilots haven't seen Milikin's element yet. They're focused downward looking for the bomber stream, not expecting American fighters above them. Milikin has altitude advantage, has surprise, has 3,000 feet of vertical energy he can convert into dive speed. He takes a breath to call the attack. Nothing comes. He tries again. The oxygen mask delivers nothing, just cold rubber against his face and empty hissing from the regulator. His oxygen system has failed. Time of useful consciousness at 42,000 feet, 12 to 15 seconds. Milikin doesn't panic, doesn't transmit emergency, doesn't alert his wingmen, because alerting them means they'll force him to descend, and descending means abandoning position, and abandoning position means the Ta-152s reach the bombers unopposed. Instead, his left hand moves to the emergency oxygen bottle, flips the valve open, turns the regulator, breathes. Thin flow, not full pressure, but oxygen reaches his lungs. He's bought himself time, maybe 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. The emergency bottle holds enough oxygen for 3 to 4 minutes at 30,000 feet. At 42,000 feet, consumption rate doubles. Call it 90 seconds before this bottle runs empty too. 90 seconds to kill 3 German interceptors or die trying. Milikin keys his radio. His voice sounds normal, calm. Dogwood flight lead, attacking bandits 1 o'clock low, 3, 2 engaging with me, 3 and 4, hold high cover. 2's in, 3 covering, 4's high. Milikin pushes his stick forward. The P-47 noses over into a dive. Airspeed increases 280 miles per hour, 310, 340. The Ta-152s continue climbing, unaware, 370 miles per hour. The dive steepens. The 3 German fighters grow larger in Milikin's gun sight. He can see their camouflage patterns now. Gray-green uppers, light blue undersides. Reich defense markings on the fuselage. 400 miles per hour. Milikin's indicated airspeed passes the P-47's maximum level flight speed. He's diving faster than his aircraft can fly horizontally. The controls stiffen. Compressibility effects make the elevators harder to move. 450 miles per hour. The T-152s are 1,500 feet below him, still climbing, still unaware. Milikin checks his emergency oxygen. Pressure gauge dropping. He's breathing too fast, using oxygen faster than anticipated. His vision begins narrowing at the edges. Range, 1 to 100 feet. Lead Ta-152, centered in his computing gun sight. The illuminated reticle projects amber circles and bars across the target. Milikin's right thumb moves to the gun trigger. 8 50 caliber machine guns loaded with 2,250 rounds, enough to destroy a dozen aircraft if every round hits. Range, 800 feet. The German pilot finally sees him. The Ta-152 breaks left, hard turn, trying to evade. Too late. Milikin presses the trigger. 8 guns roar. The P-47 shudders. Tracers arc toward the target. Milikin walks his fire through the Ta-152's fuselage. 50 caliber rounds, each weighing 1.7 ounces, traveling at 2,900 feet per second, rip through aluminum and steel. The German fighter's canopy explodes. The engine cowling tears apart. Fuel sprays from ruptured tanks. The Ta-152 rolls inverted and enters an uncontrolled spin. Milikin pulls off target, reverses hard right toward the second Ta-152. His airspeed is 485 miles per hour. The German pilot has seen the attack now, is turning hard, trying to extend away. But Milikin's dive speed closes the gap. 900 feet, 700, 500. His vision tunnels further. The emergency oxygen bottle is running empty. He's got maybe 30 seconds before unconsciousness. Milikin fires a 6-second burst. The second Ta-152 takes hits in the wing root. The right wing separates from the fuselage. The aircraft tumbles, 2 down. Martinez calls, "Lead, 2's engaging number 3. Milikin tries to respond, can't form words. His emergency oxygen is gone. His vision has shrunk to a gray tunnel. His hands feel distant, disconnected. He's at 38,000 feet, airspeed 390 miles per hour, and his brain is shutting down. The third Ta-152 dives away from Martinez, heading toward the bomber stream 5,000 feet below. Milikin noses over, follows. Not because he's conscious anymore, because gravity and momentum carry his P-47 in the direction it was already pointing. His last conscious thought, stay in the dive, stay on target. Then hypoxia takes him. At 37,000 feet, Captain Robert Millikan loses consciousness. His hands go limp on the controls. His head slumps forward. His P-47 Thunderbolt continues diving at 400 miles per hour, descending through cloud layers, following a ballistic arc determined by gravity and aerodynamics, and the last control inputs Milikin made before his brain shut down. The German Ta-152 pilot sees Milikin's P-47 diving behind him, sees the American fighter closing, assumes the pilot is still conscious, still attacking. The German pilot brakes hard left, trying to evade. Fatal mistake. The turn bleeds energy, slows the Ta-152 from 380 miles per hour to 320, and Milikin's unconscious P-47 doesn't turn, doesn't adjust, just keeps diving in a straight line. The aircraft converge. At 34,000 feet, atmospheric pressure reaches 3.8 pounds per square inch, enough for minimal consciousness. Milikin's eyes flutter open. He's confused, disoriented, doesn't remember the last 30 seconds. His P-47 is 600 feet behind the Ta-152, diving through 33,000 feet. Muscle memory takes over. Right thumb finds the trigger. Milikin fires. The burst is wild, undisciplined, but at 600 feet, even wild bursts find targets. 50 caliber rounds slash through the Ta-152's tail. The vertical stabilizer disintegrates. The aircraft enters an inverted spin, 3 for 3. Milikin pulls out of the dive at 31,000 feet. His vision clears. His oxygen regulator, now functioning normally at this altitude, delivers steady flow. His hands stop shaking. Martinez's voice crackles in his headset. "Jesus Christ, lead! I thought you were dead." Milikin takes 3 deep breaths before responding. 2. Lead. Status. Lead, all bandits down. Bomber stream clear. You okay? Affirmative. Descending to rejoin main formation. Milikin checks his fuel. Enough for 90 minutes. Checks his ammunition. 200 rounds remaining. Checks his hands. Still trembling slightly, he just shot down 3 German interceptors while unconscious, and nobody can ever know. If this story of extreme courage at the edge of human capability is resonating with you, smash that like button and drop a comment about the most insane act of pilot skill you've ever heard of. We read every single comment. Now let's talk about what happened after Milikin landed. Milikin lands at RAF Boxted at 12:35 p.m. His hands still shake as he climbs out of the cockpit. Sergeant Esposito meets him on the tarmac. "Sir, gun camera film shows 3 kills. Congratulations." Milikin nods, doesn't smile. "Thanks, Tony." "Sir, you look like hell. You okay?" "Fine, just tired." Esposito knows better. 26 years maintaining aircraft teaches you when pilots are lying, but he doesn't push. Major Henderson debriefs the mission at 1400 hours. All 16 P-47s returned safely. No bomber losses to high-altitude interceptors. 3 confirmed kills, all Milikins. Mission success. Henderson pulls Milikin aside afterward. "Captain, I read your gun camera footage. Your dive attack on those Ta-152s was unusual, almost like you were unconscious during part of it. Want to explain?" Milikin meets Henderson's eyes. "Sir, oxygen system functioned normally. Standard dive attack. Got lucky with the 3rd kill." Henderson stares at him, knows there's more to the story, knows Milikin isn't telling him everything. Finally, the major nods. "Sometimes, Captain, I don't want to know the details. You brought everyone home. That's what matters." Milikin returns to his quarters, writes a letter to his father in Boise. "Dad, remember that tractor on the slope? The one where you used gravity and steering to control a dead engine? Today I did something similar. Can't tell you details. But your lesson saved my life. Thank you." The letter arrives in Idaho 3 weeks later. Thomas Milikin reads it twice, then burns it in the wood stove. Some lessons work better when they're not officially documented. Captain Robert Millikan flies 23 more combat missions before Germany surrenders on May 8, 1945. His final tally, 12 confirmed kills, 76 total combat missions, Distinguished Flying Cross, 3 air medals. After the war, Army Air Forces investigators review high-altitude combat tactics. They interview pilots about oxygen system failures. Several pilots mention gray-out incidents where they lost consciousness briefly but somehow recovered. The investigators recommend improved oxygen delivery systems, better regulators, backup bottles positioned for easy access. They never officially acknowledge that pilots successfully fought while unconscious. Milikin returns to Idaho in September 1945. He takes over his father's farm, never flies again, never talks about the war. When local reporters ask about his service, he gives one-sentence answers. "Did my job, came home, nothing special." In 1983, a researcher from the Air Force Historical Research Agency tracks down Milikin, now 62 years old, to interview him about high-altitude combat tactics. Milikin declines. "Son, what happened at 42,000 feet stays at 42,000 feet. Some things work better when they're not officially documented." The researcher thanks him and leaves. But before departing, he says, "Sir, you should know. Modern fighter pilots still carry emergency oxygen bottles positioned for easy access. It's standard procedure now, because of pilots like you." Milikin nods once, doesn't smile, just returns to his tractor, working the same land where his father taught him that when machinery fails, you don't panic. You understand what's still working and use that. Captain Robert Millikan died in 2004 at age 83. His obituary in the Boise newspaper mentioned he was a World War II fighter pilot. 12 confirmed kills, Distinguished Flying Cross. It didn't mention that 3 of those kills came while he was unconscious at 42,000 feet, fighting an enemy he couldn't see, breathing air that didn't exist, using gravity and geometry and farm boy understanding of how machines work even when they're failing. Sometimes the quietest heroes did the most impossible things, and sometimes the most effective weapon isn't courage or skill or technology. Sometimes it's just understanding physics and refusing to panic when your oxygen stops flowing and 3 German interceptors are climbing toward 720 men who are depending on you to keep them alive. That's not insanity. That's mathematics.